John, I'm so excited that we are talking because you came into my life in a pivotal time. And I'll share with you like what happened on my side that led to your phone call to me, and you'll share with me yours, because at the time I didn't realize the significance of our meeting in my life. And actually, I'm also going to share with you the greatest shock I ever had professionally for something that I did with Good Nature happened on June 14th, 2020, when we had our last Zoom call. So Sean, if you can just share a little bit your story, because I think it's fascinating.
Thank you, Peter. And what a pleasure being with you and seeing you and talking with you. I have such a fond memory of our first in-person meeting at the top of the hotel, looking down across San Diego, that beautiful harbor. And in very trying times, literally 2 days into what has turned out to be the most horrific 3 years in many ways, the beginning of COVID, and when everything was just a rolling series of cancellations. And I was heading up the world's largest peer network of CEOs, a business called YPO that's been around for 70+ years. So my story is simple, Peter. I'm an immigrant to the United States, a proud US citizen, originally born and raised in South Africa. Both my parents were entrepreneurial, very hardworking, but I decided to emigrate to Canada when I was 25 years old and put my stake in the ground and try my hand at being my own person, running my own business, and tracking a path that was bold, pioneering, and daring. And I look back and I don't think I'd change a thing. I obviously made mistakes along the way, but it's been an extraordinary journey. So my first business was in the professional services, human resources consulting game. I had a partnership with Canada's first publicly traded executive search firm called the Caldwell Partners. The Blue Door. Remember the office on Prince Arthur?
Yes.
Go through the blue door. Doug Caldwell was a pioneer of the industry in Canada, and in fact is in the Hall of Fame for executive search owners worldwide. He became a mentor for me for over 4 years. I learned a tremendous amount from him and his partners. And then I had the privilege of buying the shares that he bought in my business back. And essentially that early lesson, the 9.5 years I spent in Toronto working with people like Doug and others, I learned a tremendous amount about how important people are along your journey.
Yes.
I then subsequently met my wife, who was a business owner living in Mexico. We met through an organization called the Entrepreneurs Organization, EO. We got married, and Maria did not want to suffer the cold climate of Canada.
You're not a good salesman. I got my wife to move to Toronto from La Jolla.
Oh, I struggled. We had 2 homes, we had 2 setups, we had 2 businesses, but we eventually agreed that we'd move to the United States.
Yes.
I was working extensively in the US at the time. I had over 2,000 clients, ranging from banks like ING and Harris Bank and a lot of the big life insurance companies. I've been very blessed and very fortunate. And we moved to Dallas, Texas, and that's where we've been ever since.
So you've been there for how long now? 20 years?
It's 24 years now.
Wow.
We had my daughter here. My wife had our daughter here in Dallas. She's just heading off to university, just graduated high school. And we're very happy with that and embarking on her university career. And so we're going to be empty nesters, Peter, in a little while here.
Where is she going to school? Which state?
She's going to school in Indiana. She's going to school in the beautiful small city of South Bend.
Okay.
Talk about cold.
Right, because for her, it's like she gets to wear all this clothes she never got to wear before, right? I've seen. I saw my wife pointed out something to me when she moved up to Canada. She said, you know, the movies lie to you. They make it look so beautiful, but they don't tell you it's cold.
That's
It just
right.
looks nice in the winter. So let me step back and just understand. So YPO is the Young Presidents Organization. It's the largest executive business owner organization in the world.
Correct.
It's invitation only. From my
Correct.
understanding, you need a company that does about $13 million worth of revenue and 25 employees, and it's a peer group where you're able to meet with your peers to talk about discussions that you wouldn't feel comfortable with the people who work in your business. It grew from being a global organization, but very focused on regional, and you grew it to becoming this global organization.
Very fortunate run. I happened to arrive at a time when we had integrated our alumni organization, which used to be called the World Presidents Organization, WPO. That integration had been led by a member leader, Shep Moyle, a phenomenal global chairman at YPO. And I came along at a period where that integration needed a lot of care and feeding. There were two different brands, and we needed to professionalize the organization. Imagine taking two accounting departments, two service departments, and we hadn't done a really great job on the retention side of the business with our alumni group, mainly because the product and service and the things that YPO were doing were not emulated exactly by the alumni group or by the WPO group. So we spent a lot of time working with member champions, because YPO is a member. It really is the heart and soul of YPO. Is its members are the leadership. They're the ones that do a lot of the volunteer work. I'd been a member prior to joining the management team for over 8 years. So I came to my role with having been a very active member and having volunteered globally. I put on 2 massive events that I chaired, both award-winning events, 9.5 out of 10, thousands of people, both in Singapore and in Istanbul. But my role was primarily to create excellence in learning, and the delivery of our forum product, really take our networks group to the next level, and focus on membership, focus on value, focus on creating the kind of bridges and connectivity that is the cornerstone of the organization, and doing that at scale. So by the time I left, midway through the first 6 months of COVID, we were up over 33,000 members. And during my tenure in charge of membership, we had a 95+% annual retention year on year, which for any organization is almost unheard of. Now, that was the result of many, many people who worked tirelessly to make sure that, 1, members were heard, 2, we were delivering value. My team was supported, trained, nurtured, and understood the ethos of the organization. And collectively, putting a team and a group together made it work. Now, I was fortunate that I had a CEO that I reported to, Scott Mordell, who was just an extraordinarily gifted CEO. I learned a lot from him. I had never run a large business up until the point in time that I came to YPO. So my first couple of years was really learning at the foot of a master. And the way that I was treated by him was exceptional. Open conversation, very candid. We'd discuss everything in a very forthright manner, but we operated as partners. We didn't operate in a hierarchical, you're better than me, I'm better than you. It was very clear definition and demarcation of roles and responsibilities. And then with the authority of the board, because it's a nonprofit and led by a 22-person board at the time, we were mandated and tasked with fulfilling on the expectations of a strategic plan. And being given the authority to do that was very rewarding and very empowering, and the results speak for themselves.
Well, the results were, at the end of your tenure, how many members did you have and how many countries? And the part that I always find impressive, what would the GDP be of YPO of all members? Because that's the part that, just blows people away with, like the caliber of the members and what they actually had influence on in the world.
So over 33,000 members, 124 countries, and revenue sales across all members and all member companies, $9 trillion US. That's a T.
That's a T, just like the US deficit this year.
Well, we won't go down that slippery slope.
We need humor.
So, an extraordinary organization, and one that has lasted for a long time. And I hope you and I get to talk about the art of locating yourself in this long arc of time, and the importance of where you are and how you locate yourself. And then with the wisdom accomplished or amassed, how do we benefit from that in a very authentic way?
Actually, it's interesting how we came together, and I'll share what like my story, and you can share your story, because to me there are no accidents, because it was the synchronicity of that moment for me. It took me time to step back to appreciate what was happening in my life. So just to share with you that I had written a number of textbooks, and I was getting bored with what I was doing, and I was a very ferocious reader, and I had a meeting with a gentleman who had a large foundation, and I tried to give him my textbook that was 1,200 pages long, and he said two things to me that were very revealing. One was he told me to keep it because he wasn't going to read it, and I'm sitting there in shock, right? And I'm not gonna, I'm gonna share this because people are listening. There's people who authentically are leaders, and there's other people because they were born into it. And this individual is what I would call a PhD, a Papa Haddo, who a lot of people similar to, let's say, the Prince Charles, they had all this stuff bestowed on them, but they hadn't done it themselves. So he turned to me and he said, "You keep it." Now, he was speaking on future leaders, so you can understand the disconnect that I had there. But he said something else to me. The person who was giving away all his money had written a chapter, and he said he's been paying guys like me to read books like that so he didn't have to. And I thought about it, and I said, yes, he's right. And then I became obsessed. I mean, obsessed. Like, I did one thing in my life where I know if I touch it, I will ruin it. And that is something that I wish upon every young person to experience, that they put so much into something that if they make one little change, they're going to ruin it. And it's the most satisfying feeling I've ever had. And what happened to me is I discovered that I was writing it for myself. It was a letter I would have wrote to to the damaged younger me, but I wrote it as a fictional story.
Yes.
And the reason it resonated with a lot of men is because it doesn't matter what our external successes are. Much of our drive are unresolved issues. And this for me was a very powerful thing. And I actually read over 250 books on male aging. And I was doing it as a child. And I want to share what I mean by that. I was looking at it, if I was a younger person in my late 30s, and I started researching this stuff, and it was one of the topics I was interested in. And I was thinking, I want to know my prey, the successful, super wealthy businessmen. So when I sit down with them, I know more about them than they do. You know what I realized, Sean? You know what the difference between the eater and the eaten?
No.
Time. I was reading about the future me. Like, I would actually realize all the things I'd miss. And I started reading that. And then when I was so obsessed with the editing, because I spent like $40,000 on the editing, and I'm a writer, and I think I'm a good writer.
You're a good writer. Oh, I've read your book. It's phenomenal.
But I wanted to make sure that everything was accurate, that if I got into a plane and I crashed, something would live beyond me. and one of the ideas I had in the book is, I'm not going to mention the general's name, but back in 1999, I was doing a seminar, not a seminar. I was doing a panel. It was one of those ideas I should have kept in my head, because it was women in technology, and I was the moderator. Stupid, right? It was very stupid. Right? It was a disaster. It was the worst thing that ever happened. But I'm in the washroom. I meet a gentleman. His name's Michael. I know who he is. He's there for another organization, similar to YPO. It's called Tech. He just
Yes.
invested in it, and he was really impressed, because you had to see there were a lot of attractive people coming to my event, and he had a bunch of old men, sort of like your best members probably look really bad in bathing suits, right? Those are my best clients. So that's the presentation. He didn't see it. It was a disaster, because I shouldn't have done it. It should have stayed in my head. I saw him later. We went out. Nothing ever came out of it. So I went to that same hotel that you and I met.
Yes.
And I'm there. I'm going to a meeting, and I see that they're having their conference there. And I said, and when I was writing the book, I said, this is a book that these older business people should be reading. So I went to the dollar store, and I bought like 8 thank you notes, and I bought 8 bubble wraps, and I sent it off to that organization. And then I remembered YPO, and I looked you up, and I sent it to you and your members to it. And I just moved to San Diego, so I didn't know my address, but I knew my mother's address. So my printing is the same as it was in grade 3. And I sent it off to you, and I didn't even think much about it. And then I went back to Toronto, and I get this call, and it's you, and you're going to be in San Diego. You had immigrated to Toronto, and the reason, and because it was handwritten, because you were sharing with me, you don't know how it got to you.
Yep.
And I felt honored that you still came to San Diego after the event was canceled, and we're meeting in that same hotel.
Same
that
hotel.
I had the inspiration. And at that point,
story.
Well, the better story, I think, is this. I really believe that, and this is something I share, especially because of COVID. I think people's past success, and this is, me included, we get attached to it. And when there's major change, there's people, they can get killed by their past success. It's people don't understand the story of Narcissus.
Yeah.
He falls in love with his reflection in the water, but it represents consciousness. He falls into his consciousness. He becomes completely immobile, and that's what I've discovered with COVID. People who are super successful, they get stuck. So just to share with you one thing that sticks in my mind, I'm thinking, I wrote this book, it's going to hit now because it's got the audience. The president, the COO of YPO loves it. It's going to happen. And I'm like excited. I'm stuck in Toronto, the world. I'm planning, because I actually booked a flight on the 19th of March to go down. I took the worst, it was going to be the worst stopover, right? So I'd like hang out with you and your team. And we ended up speaking on June 14th, like after all this craziness. And you tell our viewers what you shared with me, because I want to set this up. So Sean liked my book. I was very impressed that he read it. He felt that people in his organization should read it, and you can understand $9 trillion, it gets you a little excited. So I call, we're on a Zoom call, and share, and I have to do this. Before he tells me what he's about to tell everyone here, he holds up my book. It's all dovetailed. He's telling me it's had a huge influence on me. And now share with everyone what you shared with me at that moment.
I say, Peter, I'm leaving YPO. I'm going to follow the next act of my life. And I'm sorry I can't help you the way I intended to help you, but this book stimulated me to think very differently about what I wanted to do, what I wanted to accomplish, how I wanted to give back. And you were the first person, I think, that I actually shared that with in a very candid way, because you and I had connected on a
Yes.
different level. It was, I know, disappointing for you, but it was very freeing for me.
It wasn't, because I got to tell you what happened after that. I almost got run over the next day. I was on my electric scooter.
Oh,
I
you
got hit.
told me that. You nearly got run over.
I almost got killed, but the insurance just wrote me in the check after 2 years. But I almost got killed. So here I was. I sold my house in Toronto. After that night, I sold my house in Toronto. So like we're talking, the whole chapter of my life is ending, and I'm sitting there. And I guess since I'm gonna say it, I'm sitting there thinking, you know, like, these things happen to me, just like I told you with the executive committee. You know, like, I'm sitting down with this guy, Michael. I'm not going to say his name, but he was, you know, you could probably guess
A
who it is.
legend. I know who he was.
Right. And everything that could have gone wrong in between the time I impressed the hell out of him to the time we actually sat down for drinks went wrong. And here I am. This has happened. I'm sitting there. I said, you know, Peter, you like living on a boat. You can't live on this. You can't live on land. It's like, you know, if this was going to happen to anyone, of course this was going to happen to you, because I've started industries in Canada. And I wrote my first book. There was this guy who comes up to me. He was able to get about $600 million worth of assets because of a structure that I came and thanked me. And I'd go into groups and I could be the one that they would have call. But everybody, I almost went bankrupt over trying to take over that industry, right? But everyone else got rich. But the point is this, and this is what I want to share with you, because I had a chance to think about it. I become more spiritual, religious, and I realized that if I had hit it out of the park at any time before for the mission that I'm meant to be on right now, I would have not done it, and I wouldn't have had the appreciation or the humility. Because right now, I don't care if someone came to me with $1 billion. I realize it's about my time, about the things that have happened in our society. It's at the goal, I think, is this in life: to maintain your self-dignity and your soul. Because I've seen people, when I was reading that, when I was researching that book, there was a gentleman in Toronto. He's worth about $5 to $6 billion, and I had a chance to study with him. And just before he died, he was running the first half of life, and that is accumulation, ego, and everything. He was really a hurt child, but he would show up on Fridays and everyone would come because he was such a big builder and influence in Toronto. And he didn't tell anyone he's dying with cancer. And he was still running that race of life. And it was a disaster when he died. But he bought the Celestica in Toronto. For those of you who don't know, it was like 100 acres in the middle of Toronto, and it's having like a $10 billion development right now. And that's how he chose to spend his last days. Now, he did show up on Fridays, and I looked at that, and the question is, would I want that life? And then I realized the life that I've chosen, Sean, I'm able to, it's time. I have clients who I didn't realize that I would drop around and get to visit them, but I got to leave their gilded cages. And you're from South Africa. And my partner was he's still alive. He's South African. He told me about all his friends who stayed in South Africa. They had really wonderful lives. They were just living in gilded cages, where they basically didn't have the freedom. And a lot of these people who, when I was young, I admired it because they were successful, they were wealthy and everything. However, they didn't have that calm. And that was like a big, that was a learning. So I thank you for that experience, because I don't believe it would, me selling 30,000 books and speaking at YPO, I don't believe that is what I've been saved for on the bench. Because again, I'm just getting off the bench. I've been on the bench.
Absolutely, Peter. And that philosophy is so powerful, right? It's not in order to, it's a grounded knowledge of your reality, but not ignoring your dreams and not ignoring the determination, but it's how do you take where you are today? And by the way, that's a lesson I've learned for everybody. You and I have come to that realization through the School of Hard Knocks, as does everybody else. But hopefully for everybody, and this is my desire and wish for everybody, is they come to that state of calm where they can look very objectively and very honestly at where they are and then make a choice that isn't about necessarily accumulation, that isn't necessarily about putting a rung on the board in service of something that maybe is meaningless, but doing that in a way that truly has an impact. Does that make sense?
I fully agree. I had a rare opportunity there on Fridays. There was like, I got invited to this cigar smoking, cognac drinking, and we're talking mayor, people who wanted to be the mayor of the city, whatever. They all come, and they were all come, all the builders in the city and everything. The reason I share that with you, because I got a chance to observe, and I realized it's not my place to tell these people how to live their lives, but
right.
I shared with you, I kept on reading all those books on male aging, and it didn't matter what they had, they were doing it all wrong. Because maybe at the beginning of their lives, that's why they were doing it. They weren't even conscious. They were measuring themselves, other people. My favorite word is the word Maya. You know, because it's illusion, but it's also measurement.
Yep.
So I can't compare myself to you. Like I realize that, like I can't remove myself from that. And the journey, I think the journey is the most important thing. One of the greatest things that happened to me, Sean, and then I want to focus on you, is one of the reasons I also wrote the book is I realized that I wanted a legacy, and maybe this would work or not, but the story behind Melville, who wrote Moby Dick, was really my story. Melville wrote the book in 1851. There were 3,300 copies printed. Only 570 sold in his lifetime. He never wrote another book. He died in 1891.
I'm going to have to go into therapy after this.
I know, no, but I have to do. So 41 years after he wrote Moby Dick, never wrote another book. He dies. And then in 1923, 73 years after he'd written the book, and 32 years after he died, D.H. Lawrence writes a book on the great American literature, and he says, what does he say? He says, Moby Dick is the greatest book. Yeah. And it's not in copyright. So it's sort of like that movie, It's a Wonderful Life. It's the book that we know. And for writing, he happens to be the Van Gogh.
Yes.
That he never actually, and this is the message I was giving myself. I said, I don't need an audience. And that's the thing that I would impress upon anybody who's successful or not successful.
Yes.
You're your audience.
You are.
And so I'd like to lead into your coaching now, because you went into coaching and taking you started out with coaching when you came to Canada, right? When you had a program for coaching.
An element of what we did was supporting. We spent a lot of time teaching and coaching human resource professionals to really be experts and balanced in their hiring and how they brought people into the organization. But that was at a more mid-level management level. And
right.
25 years ago, I had the privilege of meeting Mark Moses, my partner today, the founder, the CEO of CEO Coaching International.
Another Canadian.
Sudbury, Canada, an amazing story. I mean, Mark's story in and of itself is remarkable. And a self-made man, a wonderful family man, 2 great kids, and a passionate vision for having an impact in the lives of other people. And yes, does he make money at it? Sure. Every business that's in business should make a profit, and that makes the world go round. So I'm an unapologetic, conscious capitalist. And I use the word conscious because I think there's a whole conscious capitalist movement. But I think for me, my experience has been, if what you're doing has a lasting impact, and people that learn from you or learn from a coach can pay that forward, and then they pay that forward. The whole concept of mentoring, and you and I have spoken about this,
Yeah.
is so powerful. And religious people understand that, right? The religious, whether you're a rabbi, whether you're a priest, or whether you're a padre, those people hold a very unique role in society, in a very unique place. But I think we can play those roles. I've done that my whole life. I've mentored people from the time that I realized what mentoring was, and I still do today. But the coaching business is a fascinating business, and it's literally exploded in the world. Now we play a very small role in a very niche part of the coaching business, and for us, our major differentiation, Peter, is the caliber and experience of our coaches. Think of the King of Main Street.
Right. Yes.
Think of the message that came through that is you take an individual with extraordinary experience who's not going to tell your protagonist, your lead character, what to do, but they are going to sit and ask questions. In your examples, the coffee shop, meeting this, not even knowing that this individual is a titan of industry. Our coaches have all run very successful businesses, over $100 million minimum to even be considered to be a coach with us. Some of them have run multi-billion-dollar companies, Mercedes Finance, Procter & Gamble, Universal Vivendi, the list goes on. Some of them have run smaller businesses, taken them to, 200, 300, 400 million. That's not the point. The point is these people are, all of them have experienced the walk of life that you and I have experienced. They've made mistakes. They've learned by doing. They've experienced successes. They've experienced failures. They've now reached a point in their lives where they don't no longer want to deal with the, let's say, the bureaucracy and the difficulties, because it's not easy running a business. You and I both know that. But they still want to have an impact. And the impact they want to have is being able to be a coach, a listener, somewhat of a consultant potentially, if there's room for that in the relationship, but most importantly, to be what we call an accountability partner to the client that we're coaching in a manner that nobody else can do, because there's no what is the word I'm looking for? There's no preconceived relationship. There's no obligation. There's no, you're my board member, you're a stakeholder, you report to me, you don't report to me. They're an individual who's having a confidential conversation, listening, meeting our clients where they're at, truly getting to the pain point that needs immediate help with, not help tomorrow, not help 5 years from today, but meeting them where they're at, and then based on their wisdom and experience, being able to share different points of view through the methodology of asking questions and really getting down to the root causes, and then providing the client an opportunity to say, how do we solve these problems? I've got some ideas. What do you think needs to be done? And then pressing in a very candid, very authentic way to get them to have the breakthroughs that everybody can have.
I think what you shared about they've all been running successful businesses, because that to me is key. Does someone actually have that experience? Like that saying that a picture's worth 1,000 words and experience is worth 1,000,000,000,000 of those. And it's one thing for someone to actually have that experience. Like, I'm a parent. I know what it's like to be a parent. I've lost a parent. I have never lost a child. I think, I'm thankful. I've never suffered. Like, I've had, the things didn't work out the way I would have liked them to be. However, I've been privileged.
Yes.
And someone who gives advice, because getting back to the coaching.
Yes.
The coaching business has exploded. And I want to share with you a funny story about that always sticks in my mind.
Yes.
So when I was young, back in my early 20s, I'm walking to my parents' building. I meet this nice woman, and she goes in. She's running a seminar in the party room, and I ask her, what's it on? And she goes and says it's on relationships. So I say, great. And then I want to ask a question, right? Because you talk about you have successful business owners. So tell me about your relationship. Well, I've been divorced 3 times. So my question is, so tell me how you're an expert on relationships. She says, I know it doesn't work. Well, let me just share with you what I tell everyone who asks me a question, and the questions I ask. If I want to be successful in a marriage, I'm going to look at someone who's in a successful marriage and ask them.
Yes.
If I want to be successful in business, I don't go to, and not, degrading the job, but a government employee and ask about entrepreneurship. Well, you want to go to somebody who's done it, and you want to go to someone, and the most powerful thing that I've determined is choosing that person and asking instead of going after them, because there's in the Tao Te Ching, there's a statement that I try to repeat to myself and try to live.
Yes.
And it's the one that knows does not speak, and the one who speaks does not know. So if I live a great life, or I like what you're doing, Sean, I'm going to go to you and I'm going to say, what are you doing? Now, I've always found that somebody who joins like an organization that's self-help and whatever, and they're not exactly sure, they start becoming, they might go on the street corner and start singing the praises, because they're looking for a validation, because they're not sure of their choices.
Mm.
And I think that calm also comes with an elder. And one of the things which you mentioned, which I think is really important, is our society doesn't have elders anymore. There's so few, and there was one of my favorite writers. He was a poet. His name was Robert Bly.
Yes,
he wrote two big books. He wrote Iron John, but that's not the book that had the greatest influence on me. He wrote it. His second book was called The Sibling Society.
Yeah.
And the problem with the West is we become siblings. We do not have adults and elders. We just have people who are like the same. Where and I made a point in my book, just to share with you. I think you got the third edition of it, because I was obsessed with.
I think I did. I'm looking over my shoulder because I have my bookshelf behind me.
Okay.
And it's up there somewhere. There it is. I can see it from here, but I don't know if it's the third edition or not.
No, it's the third one. It's the last one. I put the American flag on it.
That's right. It is the third one.
It's the third one. And I took input from people. People would read it, and then I would ask a question where they were coming from. So I made it a point in the book that Harold, who is almost like God, right? Who chooses to be benevolent, because he could squash anybody the way I put him in the book, and he chooses not to. He understands his responsibility. But the main character, Michael, he keeps on calling kiddo.
Yeah.
So even though Michael calls him Harold, because here's this person really, really high, and there's this guy who's relatively successful, this Michael guy. He would qualify for YPO.
Oh, in a heartbeat.
And he would also qualify for, even because not a mentor, because he didn't have experience, but like wealth-wise, he would have. However, Harold makes a point to call him kiddo until he gets to the level where he calls him Michael, and he shares it. So let me share something with you that I found interesting. I took feedback for the editions, and if it made sense to me, I would go back and I edit I made sure there was no holes in the book.
Yes.
But so I had these two people, one young kid, super bright, and he had so much energy, sometimes it would cause him problems. He goes and says, I can't stand that Harold calls him kiddo. And then I asked the question, I asked myself a question, is what he's saying helping the story, or is that more about him?
Yes. Well, it's a trigger.
And it was a trigger for him, because I did it in my tradition. There's a word called boy chick.
Yes, I know the boy chick word very well.
Yeah, so I used to be like these. I have a client who I love, who actually is sort of like somewhat of my Harold character. Like he dresses like a schlep. He likes you to think he has no money. He takes care of everybody, like literally everybody. He's like the thing, but he's like a real schlep. Like, you know what I mean? And
I
it,
know
and,
what
and
you
he,
mean.
and if you go and tell him, he's like, I got a funny story. So this, I'll put in perspective that I gave him a threat once. So I met him because charities used to send people to me, and I used to structure things. And I used to make donations to the charities back because the people in the foundation didn't want to take the money. So I used to never want my name on any of the donations, and some of them were big. Like this charity, my partner and I gave $120,000 for money that we made from someone they gave. You know, like that was their portion set aside. So Stephen goes and says to me, Peter, you should take claim to this, because he was running this big event. And I said to him, Stephen, can I put your name on it? Because the only people are going to be calling me are from other charities. but the point is, this guy used to call me boy chick, and even though and I learned so much as a human,
Yeah.
about what it was like to treat people like a human being.
Yes.
But at the same time, he said it with love, but at the same time, he was telling me, you're not my peer yet.
Yes. Yes.
Like, you
You're
can
not.
call me Stephen, but you're not my peer, because, you know, you haven't buried parents, you haven't, like, you know, you haven't like lucky, like I say this to you, boy chick or kiddo, because I like you, I see something in you, but you're not my, we're in a modern society, so you're not going to be calling me like Mr. McGinnis. Like, I'm not going to call you Mr. McGinnis. I'm going to call you Sean. But am I your equal?
Yes.
I don't,
Right.
you
No,
know, like,
yeah, no, absolutely. And
and
I'm funny.
that was important.
No, and funny you say that, because, you know, my father-in-law and mother-in-law, my father-in-law speaks Yiddish very well. And in the early part of my life growing up, Boychik was something he called me on a regular basis. Now that's changed. I've been elevated, but for a long time, but it was said with love, it was said with grace, and it was said with a deep meaning. And you know, there's a great Yiddish expression called seichel, and, you know, it's wit, it's intelligence. And to me, it has a deeper meaning. And being a spiritual person myself, it signifies to me the ability and the nuance to dissect, to determine, and to really understand, step back and understand where you are, how you got there, and then also to project out, where do you want to go, and what is it that you're going to leave behind? When you said, you know, the King of Main Street is your legacy, that's a part of your legacy. And my challenge to you or to anybody would be, in each moment, in every interaction, can we in fact leave a legacy? Can we in fact add value? You and I have spoken about the world of transactions can be a broken and negative world, because in many instances, there's a winner-loser. How can we provide value in every interaction while still and intentionally reaping the rewards of that interaction at some point in time?
I was very fortunate that early on in my career, I met this gentleman. He's retired now. His name is Derek Hill. And he would sit down with everybody he met, and he said, there's 3 types of people, Peter, you're going to meet in business. And he used to say, the first type is win-lose. I can't let you win. I can't let you do better than me. It's like, I can't. Even though if I do really well, I have psychological issues. That's what he said. Then the second type is just as bad. Win, I don't give a whether you win or lose.
Yes. Yes.
And then he said, the only relationships, and this takes age to be able to do tests, is win-win, because it's taking the long term. You know as well as I do, and you were fortunate to learn this with your first mentor when you came to Canada, that it's not about money, it's about people. It's about being able to call up people and just, and the example I use is, I have probably about 24 people that I can regularly call up. And it's like, I might have found a bunch of jacks and they might have a ball. And I come and we go to the table, we come together. We don't have to sit on each other because we're all independent wolves, right? Like we're all like
That's
hunting,
right.
but we come together, we empty it. And then you might say, well, you know, I needed a ball before because because I have, you know, I have a ball and you have jacks, but you say, I don't need it, but I need this. And I can go out and I know this guy who needs the ball.
Yes.
And to switch and make something, and it's alchemy, because that's what a human relationship is. It's like people think it's dollars and cents, and it's like it's not. And Sean, I want you to share something because you had the opportunity, because I want anyone who's listening to this, and I hope younger people listening, the people at the top who made it, they understand that. People at the bottom, you go and say people at the top who made it, they're cutthroat and whatever, they don't understand it, because people at the top, I think, are traders. I think they understand the value of those relationships. Those people who are cutthroats going up, there's going to be people lining up on the way down, or they're going to let them fall. But if you've played it right, the people who've entered your life, they have an invested interest not to let you fall.
It's 100% right. The most successful people that I have seen in business are those that really truly appreciate the interconnectedness of every interaction. They continue to be curious and lifelong learners, and they continue to pay it forward in a way that sometimes is not obvious. Sometimes it's very much purposefully behind the scenes, but they are built that way and they think that way. And as a result, amazing things come to them. You know, it's the old adage, if you read the Old Testament, you know, God's will be done. You know, you and I spoke about that there's nothing that is, things happen because they're destined to happen in many ways, but think of putting yourself in the position of respecting the interconnectedness of everything. Our ancestors, our children and our children's children and their children, that arc, that interconnectedness is part of humanity. It's part of what makes us unique as a human species. And so in the business context, people that understand that don't play the short game. They don't play the transactional game. They play the long game, and they play the long game long after they're actually deceased, because the seeds that they've laid, the relationships that they've made, the value that they've created lives long. You spoke about some amazing writers and poets and authors that are no longer here, but we're talking about them in 2022 in the present. Yeah, please unpack that.
Well, there's the one thing I would unpack, which I would share to anyone who might be listening to us, is years ago when I was a young, cocky guy, I've done so much, meaning I was lost trying to find that calm inside. So in my early 20s to maybe early 30s, most people don't know this, but I'm comfortable saying it now. I was hypnotherapy. I studied it.
Oh, interesting.
Like I was really good. And the way it comes out is when I speak in front of a large group of people, because I'm not receiving, I'm controlling. I'm able to do that in my speaking and in my writing. Wow. Because I know if it hits me, it hits you. Yes. And it really comes down to my intent. Like, what is my intent? Now, life is like a mirror to everyone. Like, we look back at it, and giving to people is really giving to yourself. That the only thing that is when you give to your children, selfish. Yes. On top of that, we never understand the true impact. And the point I wanted to share with you, when I was really young and cocky, and I mean, like, I was a weird kid, Sean. I found a guy who ran the A.A. meetings of Toronto, and we called it, because he brought me, because I really enjoyed it, but I was like a kid who learned a punch, right? And it was, I used to do AA meetings, guided visualization. I wouldn't call it hypnosis, but it was it was good. It was like I was very good. I have a voice. I know my voice puts people to sleep. Yes, my wife tells me my wife tells me it puts her to sleep. No, just so I actually trained under probably one of the most gentlest hypnotherapists. She had a PhD. Her name was Joan Donnelly, and she said, you know, you're playing with fire with what you're doing. Because I was like a kid who had learned a karate punch, and I was going out and I just wanted to do this stuff, not realizing the impact I was having on people, because maybe people weren't ready for those changes. So she said to me, you have to read Martin Buber, I and Thou. Have you heard of Martin Buber?
I've heard of it. I've not read it.
Martin Buber wrote a book in German, and this is the thing, I wish I could read the original, because I read the translation. It was called I and Thou. And the whole purpose of that book was, he called it I and Thou because I can look at, and Hitler for sure didn't read this book. And what I mean by that is I could look at you, Sean, as an it, I and it.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, there's so many people who are immature, who play the short game, who look at everyone as an it. They don't understand, when I take from this person, I take a part of myself. Because in this day and age right now, I sell intangibles. You're selling coaching and questions and whatever. So if you're not empowering yourself, how do you go and make the next sale unless you're a sociopath or a psychopath? And I say there's only a few of those out there who pretend to be sheep, and so they're wolves in sheep's clothing. But he said, I have to look at Sean as a thou, as an infinite spark. And when I look at other people as just this bunch of potential, then everything's magical. I meet somebody, and instead of saying what I can get, and they don't have what I need right now, but I'm looking at it, but there's something. And it's almost like a magical thing. And that's I love learners. Self-learners are Buckminster Fuller said the greatest learners are self-learners.
I learned this in YPO and in EO, Peter, because they have this amazing concept called forum, where you're taught to suspend judgment. And what I've realized through 30 years of practicing within the forum realm is, by suspending judgment, you're enabling huge opportunity to occur, because you're not pigeonholing somebody. You're not making them wrong or right, or you don't like this color, you don't like that color, you don't know business. It's suspending judgment, and then through observation, through listening, through your own self-awareness, and then I try and practice every day, because I'm a natural communicator. I practice stepping back, observe and listen. My brother Greg will tell you a famous saying I had, or the saying that he subscribes to me. I think I probably pinched it from somebody, so forgive me whoever made this up. But one of the things that I would teach my team and our clients was, listening is the most important management style for an executive.
Yes.
Because it enables you to step back, observe, and if you can then also suspend judgment. So when we're participating in a YPO forum group, for example, and somebody makes a statement of judgment, we call that person out. Because there's no learning in judgment. Judgment closes off the learning. It closes off the conversation.
I have a question to ask.
Yes.
And I use this analogy for myself. The worst thing that can ever happen to an individual in their life, I truly believe, is hitting it out of the park young. The worst, it's so you see child actors, I use an example. I went to an amusement park in Canada, it's called Wonderland, and I took like a quarter, and after the second quarter, it landed on a plate. And I won this big thing, and I was on a date, right? I was on a date, like this is like big.
Did you ever replicate that? Was that success?
I could never, I didn't replicate, not only that, nothing wonderful happened that night from that date, because guess what? I was addicted to think I could redo it. I didn't have the perspective to understand that this was an experience. And I just want to share with you, like sometimes, like I'm writing my next book, and it's called The Dot Collectors. And the reason I call it collectors, not connectors, is because you need to have life experiences, and you don't learn alone. And in essence, I might actually take notice of something, but I just don't know the context of it until
Yeah.
later on in experiences.
I'll
And I think,
challenge I'll challenge a little bit what you've said. Not that I'm
right,
disagreeing with you, but I think there's, even if you've had success at a young age, or you won the lottery, or
right,
you're able to overcome a childhood trauma, I
yep,
believe there's potential in every single individual to continue the journey of life in a way that's fulfilling, and in a way that it creates happiness. Because ultimately, as spiritual people, I
yeah.
do believe that we are here to fulfill our potential, whatever that
And
means. Do you agree with that?
I definitely agree. I feel myself like I meet people, and because I have perspective, because I had the opportunity, I was in the financial industry and I was advising people, and there was a company in Canada called A.K.A. They made graphic cards, and I started working with them. I found them when I was really young, and they kept on doing hiring, and the stock went from $4 to $32, like after a split. And you saw the parking lot change. And this is me, a voyeur, because I didn't have the stock options. Like they had a bunch of kids. Half of them were living with their parents still, right? But they
Yes.
had no perspective. And I sat down with this engineer who was in his 40s who had worked, and he knew that this was a once in a lifetime opportunity. The other ones didn't have perspective. And where I mentioned the dot collectors is one time I watched Behind the Music with the Bee Gees, which is a really fascinating story. They were British and Australian. They
Oh,
weren't
I've
South
seen it.
African, right?
Yes, it's an
And they,
amazing story.
and they talk about first fame, second fame. Do you know that story?
Yes,
First
I
fame, second.
do.
And I sat and I listened to it, and I said, oh my God, because it got to the point that they were so big in the 60s, they started speaking through their lawyers to each other. And
Yeah.
then they went boom, and they couldn't get a job. And when they came back and they made the music that played in Saturday Night Fever, which, they were bigger than big, right? They were so big, they were probably the biggest band, even bigger than the Beatles, like in the amount of sales they had for that song.
Yeah.
They appreciated it. And even after it went, they sat back. It's sort of like a grandparent. A grandparent might have missed the magic of their children. So they sit there and they just, like, the littlest things they missed, and they get appreciation. And that's what I took from the brothers Gibbs. They were making the point: first fame, second
Second
fame,
fame. Yeah.
because they had the appreciation for what happened, because they had context that just doesn't happen. And those, for me, I've come to the conclusion that I have to deal with those street fighters. Like the guys I dealt with, people who thought, like, they would want to pitch like really sophisticated stock picks and whatever. The business owners I dealt with all said to me, I put my family through enough. This is money I need to make sure, like, that there's something, because I know what I put them through, and I'm so thankful I'm still here to have that. And because they had actually, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and that was Nietzsche.
Yeah, and and that's a great one. And then Rilke, who's a famous, has that whole concept about dancing with the always emerging future. We're on this cycle, and this cycle doesn't end. We're in that's human nature. And so if you're not prepared to be present and be open to that view, good, bad, or indifferent, by the way, because one of the things that I've tried to learn for myself is not being attached to an outcome. It's very important to have your goals, very important to have things that you measure, etc. But none of us can predict the outcome. We can do the specific things in order to achieve the outcome, but it's in the doing of those things where miraculous things happen. It's not in the not doing them, coming up with an idea or a framework for a book. You wrote the book. the book has been read. Those are the specific and measurable things that you did. The outcome and impact of that is myriad. You have no idea.
I just want to add something which for me about the book, I didn't realize it at the time. It was me clearing out all the junk.
Yeah.
Like literally, like that person who I was that you and I sat down with, I don't know that person.
Yeah.
I was in the process of saying goodbye to that person.
Yep.
And I didn't realize it at the time. And the things I wanted at that point, they're no longer important. I think that's what's important for everyone. They have to realize, well, getting back to what you're saying, there's a thing about like riding infinity, not knowing. You want to go to, let's say I'm in South Africa and I plan to go on a river and I'm going to do 5 miles before I camp. And then 3 miles in, there's a hole in my boat and I end up being stuck on the river. And then I bump into someone. I bump into someone who goes and says, like, you tell them the story. I said, well, good thing that you had a hole in your boat, because just a half a mile from now happens to be the Victoria Falls.
Exactly. And that's what
everything has a purpose.
Exactly. And so it's being on that rhythm. It's being on that miraculous movement of time, but not doing it asleep. How many people have you and I met that go through life in a semi-comatose state of sleep and not being aware of all of these miraculous? And by the way, for me, what most meaningful for me in the last 3 years has been, right or wrong, good or bad, I see these experiences as tremendous growth opportunities.
Yeah.
Tremendous growth opportunities. And I've come to a point in my life where instead of trying to fix it, break it, reorganize it into the way that I want it to be, is to accept it and then surrender to, okay, this is where I'm at. Then solutions present themselves. By surrendering and not judging and not making it mean that I'm wrong or somebody was wrong or somebody was out to get me or that guy's a schmuck and that guy's, no, it's being in control of my choices and seriously thinking about that on a regular, daily, hourly, minute by minute basis. That's living in the present in my terminology.
One of the things that I think is missed in capitalism, that because our world's become so materialistic, like if I do follow A, B, C, I end up in, like, you know, in a certain place. With Adam Smith, he talks about the invisible hand. He talks about the presence of God. There's things that just sort of happen.
Oh, yes.
And it's synchronicity. And this is something where on my spiritual level I've come to, and I'll share it with you because it took me many years to be able to explain this. Synchronicity, serendipity, and synergy. So let me just share what that's come to me, because I almost approach life as magic now. That like, so synchronicity is a coincidence that has meaning, but it's something that happens to me. Now, according to Carl Jung, the story he tells is he's having this really heated debate with Freud, and there's 100-year-old cabinet that just cracks and breaks in half, and it symbolizes the break in their relationship because that was the last time they met. And it was significant. But it's like he looked at it from like, oh my God, look at this thing happened just at the right time. And he does subscribe to the fact that there was he put high emotion into the ether or whatever, and it caused it. Then there happens to be serendipity. Serendipity is, I have a belief that I'm participating in my life. I'm conscious. I don't know exactly what it is, but you know, I need something and I don't know what it is, but the right thing is going to present itself. Similar to when I was sharing the guy going in the river and he gets a leak and he finds out, well, oh my God, I would have been dead, right? Like, but he actually understands that. So every time something happens, he's able to step back, like you're saying, and say, there's a meaning here. I'm not meant to. Like that day that you told me that you like, you like told me, hey, I loved your book. It changed my life, but I can't help you with YPO anymore because your book changed me so much. I've always wanted to do this, and I'm going to do it now. Thank you so much. Well, what about what we were talking about? I can do my best, but instead of me going like, oh, I'm thinking, okay, like I sat back and said, there's a purpose, and it's a greater purpose, and I don't know what it is.
Yes.
And that's the serendipity. Now, getting back to synergy, Buckminster Fuller, who is known as a friendly genius, his book had such a profound impact on me when I read it. It blew my mind. And just to, make you jealous, he wrote it for 11-year-olds. Right, when he wrote his last book, The Critical Path. And I was born in 1969. He says that's the first time like humanity came together knowing we lived on something together.
You're a young man, Boychik.
Thank you.
No, I'm a little older.
Oh, you're like, I still think you're the early part of the Gen Xers. You're probably the first year.
64.
Yeah, you're the first year of the Gen Xers.
Well, I don't know, maybe the last year of the boomers.
Maybe either or.
Yeah.
So he shared that several secrets in that book because he lived an incredible life. For those who don't know who Buckminster Fuller was, he shared that 1 in maybe 10 million people knew this. It's like if you go into something greater than yourself that has like meaning, the right people and the right things happen.
Yes.
And the whole, you can't see the whole that you make, but you make a difference. So getting back to the serendipity and the synchronicity and looking at synergy. Sean, imagine you are a kidney cell and you desire a carb and you don't see how you fit into the body. And I just happen to be a taste bud cell. And somehow I get the organism, the human being, to go and eat. And miraculously, this carb shows up and you don't understand, like it just shows up. It's almost like miracle because you don't see how you're part of something greater.
Yes.
Now, someone who would look at Carl Jung's way, it's synchronicity. It's like, oh, wow, I needed it. This has such meaning. Looking at it through serendipity, it's like, no, I participated in it, even though I don't understand. And this is a synchrony where there's a greater part. I don't know how I participated, but the fact that I put it out there. And getting back to the coaching and everything, not to be committed to how you get there, but to know the way where you want to be, but to be open that it's going to happen, but not in the way that you expect it to.
Right.
And that was the big lesson I took in life. And I'll leave this to a lot of people. And it's I've come to understand this. Your greatest moment hasn't been lived. Think about the Medville, because when it comes to my book, I did everything I possibly could. Like, it's the best book that Peter Merrick at that time could have written, and it didn't take off. But I like to feel comfort that he knew he did the most he could. But more importantly, he didn't know the influence that he had. He had no idea when he left this physical plane. He never knew the millions and millions of people who would appreciate Moby Dick.
And that's why I enjoy our interaction and being with insightful people that think differently. I don't need necessarily to be around with people that think the same way I do. I think the beauty of life is to, one, accept the impermanence of life, that change is a constant. Two, I want to be around insightful, interesting people that have a different perspective, that still have a core fundamental underpinnings of value and respect and appreciation. Because I think my observation is, if you don't have that compass, and you and I both have our spirituality, and that for me is a true norm. But being able to, have insightful people around me who think differently but share the same principles and values is very profoundly meaningful to me. And I don't want to go through life alone.
Well, that was something I just want to share something, because before I started on my journey in my book, I asked a number of people a question, and a really good friend of mine gave me a really great answer. I started off with a riddle in my book. Before I even started and knowing the characters and whatever, I said, I want to start with the riddle and I want to end with the answer. So I went around and I asked people, I said, you know, the old question, if you're if you're alone in a forest and a large tree falls, does it make a noise? Right? Like, and you witnessed it. And I asked, you know, because I just, you know, the stupid question. So I asked a friend because I knew that there's something there. And the thing is, this is why you have to listen, because you don't know. So to him, it wasn't significant, but it was significant to me, his answer. He looks at me and he says, "Who gives a fuck? You're all alone." And I thought about it. I said, I have to make that the answer to the riddle in my book. It doesn't matter all the success you have if you
Right.
don't have other people who can appreciate it. And the other thing that I remember coming to an understanding and maybe listening to it, I was listening to someone say, "What's the purpose of a marriage?"
Yeah.
And they said, having a witness to your life. That's why you have friends for life. That's why, because these people have witnessed your life.
Exactly. Absolutely. And the respect for that I'm not going to should. I have been the recipient of witnessing a life and being witnessed. And the godparents that I was telling you about, they were there at my baptism or bris, and they have been a constant in my life. They're still both alive. They now live in Houston, Texas. They're South African, an incredible Jewish family. And I am so moved by their love and witness of my life. It's remarkable. And, you know, when I think about that, it gives me the comfort that I am not alone. And by the way, if we take that a step further and we really push that into the realm of philosophy and introspection, it's giving oneself up for that, that we don't know, but at least we know that there have been people today, before, and there will be in the future that hold that space for us. I think it's a beautiful thing.
I have a question to ask. So we talked about mentorship. Mentorship to me is like someone can give you a piece of advice, whatever. And what I also wanted to address, and I had someone actually ask me a question after you read my book. He said, well, he didn't ask me a question. Well, the question was actually a true statement. He said, "Peter, you never had a mentor." Because, you know, it's like the kid who, like Annie, writes about the, like, you know, the family she wished she had, right?
Yes.
She knows what the perfect family looks like because she's never had a family.
Yes.
And I thought about it, because at first I said, yeah, you're right. I've never had a mentor. And what I realized, I never had a sponsor, not a mentor. I've had plenty of people.
I've had plenty of mentors.
But a sponsor is someone who goes and says, you know, I'm going to really make an investment, and I'm going to go and make sure that this person has air cover. I listened to, I think it was Sam Zell.
Yes.
And he made a comment that his sponsor was Jay Pritzker, the current governor's father of Illinois.
Yeah, great family.
He tells a story. You know, do you know him? Because I would love him to read my book. Yeah, I was actually.
You know, I don't know him personally, but he's a YPO member.
Okay, so let me share with the one thing that, because he struck me on this, because I actually thought that he was sort of, could be like a Harold character, but he tells a story that, and I can state it because he writes about it. He goes and says that he didn't have a good relationship with the guy who owns Fox, Murdoch.
Okay.
And Murdoch was going to force him to take a bath because he wanted to be bought out. And he got a hold of Jay Pritzker, and he said, Jay spotted him. And he said, I would do anything for that man. I would die for that man. I would take a bullet for that man. And because I thought about it, not just have I had mentors, I've had anti-mentors. Yeah. People who I got, like Scrooge, I got to see what my life would be if I chose that life. I shared with you, there was that gentleman who was worth several $1 billion. No one mourns him. No one will remember him. He was nice to me, but he was angry, and he was no different than the character in Citizen Kane. He was still this angry child who, didn't matter what he had accumulated, he was never he was running his race. And for me, he's had just as much influence as someone who would have been positive, because I got an opportunity to see what type of life that meant.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's what we were talking about, is the ability to look at that from, and take from the negative and the demeaning and the debilitating and the people that want to put a knife in your back and you see it, and the people that are sponsors and mentors, and learn equally from both aspects, and be good with that. Because some people get trapped in, oh, woe is me, it's the victim. Have you read the great book, The Power of TED, The Empowerment Dynamic?
Yeah.
Fantastic, David Emerald. And he paints a very interesting framework where you can either be a victim, you can be a persecutor, a challenger, and a coach. And those are the four sort of the four buckets. And if you go through life as a victim, you'll be victimized.
Correct.
Right? If you go through life as a persecutor, you're going to get what comes from being a persecutor. You can't, people are going to put their hand up at some point and move in the other direction. They may even clock you once or twice if you're a real jerk. And then the challenge is, is a very powerful methodology. And then the coach takes one step above the challenger, which is, I'm going to present to you some options, and I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to inspire you. At times, I'm going to be a confident. At times, I'm going to tell you some hard truths. And playing that role is tricky, because none of us is trained how to do that. We're not taught. Our education system is not set up. And this is where, if we go back to really where we can move the needle, is how can we help young people today develop the skills, develop the coping mechanisms, develop the challenging archetypes and the coach archetypes, and get out of the victimhood and get out of the persecution mode. And that's not easy, but it's worthwhile doing, and it's doable.
One of this woman who I shared with you had a huge impact on me, who introduced me to I and Thou by Martin Buber. She also shared something with me. She said that if you do not have those influences, read.
Yeah.
They can become your friends.
Yeah.
Because you might be in a situation where you're not exposed to these incredible people, but you could be exposed to them. Because I know in the conversation that you and I are having, there are thousands of people in this conversation right now.
Thousands of people.
The thousands. And it's like, and this is what people don't, and I tried to communicate that too. Like, when I meet you, it's not just Sean, it's like everybody who's influenced Sean, it's everybody that Sean's read. The part that I'm excited, and this is how it was changed for me. I think the reason I have never fallen really on my face, like I've been able to get up, is I've approached it as I'm Charlie, and I'm going to turn the corner. I'm going to find the golden ticket.
I love it. But that's also part of, what I love about that is, yourself. We all know ourselves. And if we truly know ourselves, we'd be, that gratitude that comes out, that little boy, that excitement, that the world is this extraordinary. It's an extraordinary place. I was watching that video, The Pale Blue Dot, that Carl Sagan did several years ago. I posted it on my LinkedIn last week, because it really is inspiring for me. Just to put ourselves in the context of this massive, and with this new telescope that's out there and exploring all of these
the James Webb,
and how we're such a small, almost insignificant cell. You talked about a liver cell in the car. But when you place us in that perspective, we are the only current sentient beings that we know. There may be others, but right now it's just us on this little small pale blue dot in this massive universe. And we all think we're so important, that we've got so many things to accomplish, and that we're no better than anybody else. But if we boil it down, we're just trying to survive on a day-to-day basis. And to do that, how do we do it? With happiness, with joy, with gratitude. And that's what I love about, these frameworks that you and I are talking about, moving from a victim mentality to a creator mentality. Instead of saying, poor me, I'm not responsible, this has happened to me, I choose to. I take my responsibility for this part of what I've created.
I wasn't ever that creative, Sean, because you know
Oh,
what I
come on,
learned?
you are.
I read, I read something years ago, and I used to drive one of my partners nuts too when we started at it, because I found a loophole in the Securities Act, and I started a mutual fund dealership
Yeah.
at 23, and it was the stupidest idea. It was one of the many stupid ideas I had, because I wanted to be boss, and maybe I should have had a little mentorship before I became boss, right? So
Or
I
at
read
least
a book.
find somebody to help you who'd been boss that could
Right.
avoid the mistakes, which is what.
Yeah, but I just wanted to be the boss. Like, I needed the universe to beat me down.
I just
bit,
want the
right?
boss title.
I wanted to be the boss title. Like, I was meant to be a boss. Like, little did I know, no, maybe I needed, you know. So I read this line that actually I constantly said to myself. I didn't believe it, but I kept on saying it every time things didn't go my way, and that was like almost every other day. I would say, not that I failed. I said, this is a learning experience.
Yes.
So one time, the guy I'm working with, who I convinced to do this crazy idea with me, I say this to me. So he turns to me and he says, "So when do we stop learning?" Because every time it was a learning experience. And at the same, what's the next stage for you? Because there's like, you've had 3 years to like go through a major adjustment. So what's next?
Well, I'm living what's next. You know, I've decided that from where I sit, I have the most amazing opportunity to leverage the collective wisdom, experiences, learnings, network, and for an incredibly meaningful cause to me, which is impacting the lives of other successful business people to realize their dreams and their capabilities. And that's pretty special when you think about it.
Sean, I want to thank you for this. This was powerful, and I'll tell you what I actually believe, and you said it to me when we left that meeting the last time we sat in a room and we broke bread together. You said you saw opportunity. You didn't know how we were going to work together, but you just knew it. And what I truly have come to believe is, when anybody works with someone, there's 3 questions one asks, and I got this from Lou Holtz. It has nothing to do with me. And he goes and says, the first thing is, do we share the same values?
Amen.
Can we work together? And the last one is, there opportunity. If you share the same values and you can work with each other, you'll find the opportunity.
Peter, thank you.
Thank you.